Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the Abyss, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. At least typically I do. Today I'm going to be talking about an art exhibition. But before I do that, a quick intro. I talk a lot about music on this channel, and recently I had a video about my favourite albums of the year so far. And on that video, I got lots of really excellent comments recommending me music that's been released this year. And I'm slowly working my way through those recommendations. So in the coming days, weeks, I'll probably release a series of videos talking about the music that I've been listening to as a result of those recommendations. Since I don't want this channel to just be about music, I also wanted to do something else first to break it up. And because I'm reading two books and I haven't finished either of them, and because the cinema is pretty much hopeless in the summer, it's just nonsense that I don't want to see, I thought, what could I talk to you about that might be interesting for me to talk about and for you to listen to, perhaps? And I thought I would talk about the exhibition at Tate Modern called A Second Life, which is a retrospective of Tracey Emin's artwork. So Thursday evening last week through to Sunday night late, I was in the UK because I am in a band called Kleinzeit and we are working on our next album. And I had to go and do overdubs and extra recordings and synthesizers and production and mixing work with my two friends in the band. And I spent basically the entire time I was in London in the studio working on this music. But I had some hours on Friday afternoon before the other guys were ready because they were working in the daytime. So I went to the Tate Modern, which is, if you don't know it, a huge power station that was converted into a massive art gallery on the bank of the Thames River in London, somewhere between the Tower of London and the London Eye on either side. And this museum had a large retrospective exhibition of the British conceptual artist, painter, sculptor, maker of embroideries, Tracey Emin, who, if you were in the UK in the 1990s, you would have not failed to hear about. There were two ridiculously famous artists in the 90s in the UK. One of them was Damien Hirst, who was famous partly for having put a shark in formaldehyde, partly for having cut up cows, and he is still, I think, one of the most highly paid artists in the entire world. And probably the only other household name who was a kind of active artist in the UK at the time was Tracey Emin. And Tracey Emin was known for having done a big embroidery work called Everybody I Ever Slept With, which included her mother and her unborn child who was later aborted, and all of the guys that she'd slept with or friends that she'd shared a bed with. And then a few years later, a work called My Bed, which was her actual bed moved into the art gallery space, and this was a bed that she'd been sleeping in and drawing in and having sex in and smoking in and drinking in, and it was set up as a kind of ready-made sculpture, and it was very controversial. It had used condoms, blood-stained underwear, empty cigarette packets, bottles of alcohol. The bed sheets were unclean, and it was seen as kind of obscene. And I think the fact that she was a woman making this artwork made it more controversial or more difficult for the public to stomach. And the fact that she was a woman also made her easy to attack. She was massively vilified and mocked in the press for a long time. Even years later, when I was still stupid enough to debate people in the comment section on the Guardian newspaper website, anytime there was a discussion about art, anybody who wanted to make a point that contemporary art was stupid or a con job or the Emperor's New Clothes would always refer to Tracey Emin. So despite her fame, I've seen very few of her works in real life prior to going to this exhibition. I remember seeing some of her drawings and thinking they were pretty interesting. I saw a sculpture, a kind of large sort of wooden rickety thing that was built in the Tate Britain. I didn't like it. And she has an enormous statue, a bronze sculpture outside the Munch Museum in Oslo that I really do not care for. But I've often seen photographs of her embroidery works and thought that they look very interesting. It's difficult to get a real sense of them when you see them in reproduction, and I wanted to go and see these particularly, so that was one of the major reasons why I went to the show. From the beginning of the show, where they're showing more of her early work, it's already very intense and emotional. The large embroidery pieces, which she calls blankets, they have big letters sewn onto them, making words, but they also have a lot of smaller text pieces kind of incorporated in. So they're actually a bit like collage. It was written on the wall that she viewed them as paintings, the way that they play with layers a lot of the time. You have this background blanket and then you have embroidered colourful things, but there are small pieces of material sewn on where there are writings in text that are almost like diary entries or thoughts. A lot of the ones that she was making in the 90s seem to be about her childhood growing up in Margate, which at the time when she grew up was a very impoverished area. In one of them, she's talking about being homeless as a teenager, living with her mother in a bed and breakfast that was kind of turned into accommodation, or maybe it was just a homeless shelter they were living in. And for reasons that I won't go into, that it was very personal to me at the moment to read about that. Then there's stuff about, school, like a really great line is, why go somewhere every day just to be told that you're late? There are some spelling mistakes in the writing, and I realized that she left school at the age of 13. And these early rooms really made me feel very connected to her. I was thinking about how a lot of the vilification that she suffered and the kind of attacks and the abuse at the hands of the media and the British public wasn't necessarily to do with the fact that her work was autobiographical or that it was confessional. It was that it was autobiographical and confessional from a place, a class, a social demographic that people do not want to hear from in the United Kingdom. It was really, really classist, the response that she got in the 90s. People do not want to hear from someone whose father's from Turkey, her mother was Roma, she was homeless through periods of her childhood, she grew up in a very stressful environment, and was, sexually aware from a young age, largely due to sexual trauma. And as I was looking at these works and I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how another British artist and musician, Wild Billy Childish, was in a relationship with her when they were young, and then later was involved in an organisation called the Stockists, who tried to advocate for figurative painting. And their name, Stockism, came from a poem Billy Childish had written about an argument he'd had with Tracey Emin, where she'd called his work stuck in the past because he was still painting and she was making more conceptual and experimental work. And that organization, the Stockists, basically made her into an antagonist, a villain, and more or less based their kind of campaign against conceptual art on her as a scapegoat. And I was thinking about how awful it was that Billy Childish, who'd been in a relationship with her, did that to her. And he also published a novel as well that I don't remember the name of now, but that's also about their relationship. And I was thinking, as I watched a video about her being bullied by boys at school when she was trying to go into a dance competition, and they were shouting names at her and calling her names and made her cry. And at the end of the video, she's dancing and she's naming them and saying, "This one is for you." I was thinking about how this has followed her through her entire life, from school to her boyfriend at art school to the British media, press, and general population when she was in her 20s, 30s, right into her 40s. Then a few rooms later, there's a new video, which is Tracey Emin outside a church where there is a doctor's surgery. And she's describing how she went to this doctor's surgery. It was her local doctor. And she was told that she could never get pregnant because she had quite serious gonorrhea, I guess in her late teens, early 20s. And then 8 years later, she did get pregnant. But she didn't have the money or the situation or the support to have a child. So she chose to have an abortion, but the doctor opposed her. So she had to fight the health service for 6 weeks in order to be allowed to get an abortion. And she talks in the video about the grief that she feels over losing this child. She says that it was a mistake, but it was the best mistake she ever made, because without that mistake, she never would have become the artist that she became. But she also says, people ask me, do I want a child? I don't want a child. I want that child, because that child chose me, but I can't have that child. And in the video, she's obviously very sad, and she's also very angry about the way that she was treated by the health service. And then there are more tapestries hanging on the wall, where one of them is about this, and it's almost like a kind of public service announcement, this artwork, to a woman who might be pregnant, and it's explaining, if you have 300 British pounds, you can get a private abortion. You don't need to go through the health service, and so you won't have to be opposed by doctors. And it says, don't keep it secret. You will need help and support, emotional support, from the people around you. And there are some other works, drawings and paintings in the room, about how painful the experience actually was for her. Some of them I think are just okay. Some of them were really visceral and intense. I really like some works where she is combining painting and text in the same way that she uses text in her embroideries or her blankets. She does also in her paintings, but it's maybe more disguised, or paint is over the language. I have one that I bought on a card. This one I think is a self-portrait, and it's got this kind of blood red color mixed with black, and the writing at the end, she's writing to the men that she's loved and who made her feel so alone. All of you, each in your own individual way. I was at fault to keep loving you. Like a fool, I followed love to the end. Like the sad, haunted soul that I am, I followed you to the end. And I guess this overlaps a little with part of her story, which the exhibition tells, which is that in 2020 also she got quite serious cancer. She became very ill, and she survived it with very radical surgery, removing a lot of her organs, so that she has like support through a bag for her digestive system. And I feel this work, which is from 2024, I Followed You to the End, is kind of a work both about her emotional life and her physical life, I think. In this work on the screen, which seems to be written to somebody that she loves or is in a relationship with, she reckons with aging, with the changes in her body. She talks about having been a little girl who grew up too fast. And at the end, she says that she is the last of her kind. There's only one like her. These works are really moving, and they're not made any less moving by an installation piece that is, I think, her studio. It has a little camping bed at one end and a lot of artworks kind of placed around walls. You can go up to the door, you look in, and you see the paintings placed around as if she's still working on them. It's similar in a way to the famous work, The Bed, that closes out the exhibition. So I had all this going on in me, this stuff about the child that she wishes that she could have had, the stuff about her own childhood. There's a piece as well where she just writes, I could have loved my innocence. There's something about her looking back across her life now, finally recognized, finally loved, finally respected, after all of these years of vilification, just for being open-hearted, just for being honest, just for trying to make work that meant something to her. So I was carrying all of these works and all of these reflections and these emotions with me as I walked into what I think is the penultimate room in the exhibition, which is mostly paintings. It's quite a large room. And above the door on the far end, there is a work that is, like some of her works, a neon sign that is based on her handwriting. And the text that is written is, meet me in heaven, I will wait for you. And when I read this, it opened something in me. And I don't typically cry in public. I find it difficult to cry at the best of times. but I started crying a little, and then I started crying a lot, and then I had to sit down on a bench in the middle of the gallery, and my shoulders were shaking and I was sobbing. If I remember correctly, the room with the bed in it is the last room, and I kind of it was sort of an anticlimax after everything else, but it's cool to have seen it. I think maybe it also was more visceral at the time because obviously it's older now, so it the objects don't look as none of it looks as lived in. It kind of looks like an artifact. So for those of you who live in the UK, and especially if you live near London, the show is on until the end of August. You have the opportunity to see it if you would like to. To everybody else out there in the abyss, in the cosmos, in the ever-expanding universe, thank you very much for listening to me talk about the show. Click like if you enjoyed this. It helps other people to see it. And yeah, as ever, if this made you think about anything you'd like to discuss, please jump in the comments. I love reading what you guys have to say. Thanks very much for now, and see you soon.